"If you have that baby, I'll ruin your family," the Millionaire CEO warned. But 5 years later, he told her, "If you have that baby, I'll ruin your entire family." She was terrified, trapped, and alone, but she refused to give in. 5 years later, he saw her again, stronger, untouchable, holding a little girl, and everything he thought he controlled was gone. What happens next will shock you. Hey, beautiful souls, I'm your storyteller, James. Today we dive into a tale of heartbreak, courage, and a mother's unstoppable strength. Stay with me till the end. I promise it will move your heart and leave you inspired. Let's begin this journey together. Emily Carter had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but nothing could have prepared her for how heavy the silence inside Blake Harrison's office felt. It was past 9 p.m., the city outside glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago. Only the soft hum of the building's heating system and the distant horns of Chicago traffic filled the air as Emily stood clutching her trembling hands together. The words were stuck in her throat. They had been lovers for months, secretly, foolishly, dangerously. She had given her heart to a man who never promised her one in return. Yet she had believed in some quiet, fragile part of her that Blake would at least care. But when she finally whispered, "Blake, I'm pregnant," everything shifted. Blake didn't blink, didn't breathe. His pen fell from his hand and rolled off his mahogany desk, tapping the edge before dropping onto the carpet. His blue eyes no longer looked like the eyes she once adored. They became cold, calculating, and full of fear. Not for her, not for the baby, for himself. Emily could feel her heartbeat pounding, loud, desperate, suffocating. She wanted him to step forward, to say something, anything. But all Blake did was lean back slowly in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, as if analyzing a business problem. And she instantly knew the truth. She wasn't a woman he loved. She was a threat he had to eliminate. His voice, when it finally came, was a whisper of steel. "Emily, this can't happen." Her breath caught. "Blake, I—" He stood abruptly, walked to the liquor cabinet, and poured himself something dark and expensive. The ice clinked against crystal, echoing like a warning. He took a long sip, then looked at her in a way that made her stomach twist. "You know I'm marrying Victoria Sloan in 6 weeks." Emily nodded. She knew. Everyone knew. It was the biggest corporate political union Chicago had seen in a decade. The Harrisons and the Sloans, two empires merging into one unstoppable dynasty. The deal that would grant Blake control over billions, influence over senators, and protection from enemies. "You told me it was arranged," Emily whispered. "It is arranged," he answered sharply. "It's strategic. It's the merger that will lock my company into federal contracts for the next 20 years. He stepped closer, his expression tightening. "If word gets out that I've been sleeping with my assistant—" Emily flinched. His assistant. Not the woman he kissed, not the woman he held in hotel rooms, not the woman he whispered secrets to. Just an assistant. Blake set his drink down, opened a drawer, and pulled out his checkbook. Emily watched, frozen, as he scribbled a number with the same precision he used to sign contracts worth millions. He tore the check neatly, placed it on the desk, and slid it toward her with one finger. $75,000, enough to handle everything. Emily stared. The numbers blurred through the sting of tears. "You think I want your money? I think you should be rational," he replied. "You know what a scandal would do. Not just to me, to you, to your family." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean by that?" Blake sighed as if her question was an inconvenience. "Emily, your mother works at St. Vincent Hospital. Union nurses are already under scrutiny after last month's strike. One phone call from the Sloan family and her job becomes unstable. Emily's blood ran cold. And your brother's auto shop? Blake continued. A permit inspection could shut him down in a day. She stepped back, hand covering her mouth. Blake, don't do this. He stepped forward, eyes locking onto hers with chilling finality. If you have that baby, he said, his voice low, merciless, I'll ruin your entire family. Her knees nearly buckled. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to run, but she forced herself to stay standing, to keep breathing. Her voice wavered. You would really do that to us? I can't afford risks, Blake replied simply. And you, he gestured toward her stomach, are a risk. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the urge to collapse. She felt like the city outside, the millions of lights shining in the darkness, had suddenly gone out, leaving her alone in shadow. But she forced herself to nod. Okay, she whispered. Fine. I'll take care of it. Blake exhaled with relief, as if she had saved him from a disaster. He didn't touch her, didn't comfort her, didn't even look at her again. He just returned to his desk and opened another file. Emily walked out of his office in silence, feeling her heart fracture with every step. The elevator ride down felt endless, and when she finally stepped onto the cold sidewalk, she pressed her hand against her belly and whispered, I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would never give up her child. That night she sat in her small apartment, staring at the check Blake had thrown at her, like a bribe. She didn't know what to do next. She only knew she had to protect her mother, her brother, and the tiny life growing inside her. Exhausted, emotionally wrecked, and terrified, Emily finally dozed off on the couch, still wearing the clothes she had worn to work. But sometime after midnight, a sound jolted her awake. A faint creak, a soft shuffle, a breath that wasn't hers. Emily sat up slowly, heart racing. Hello, she whispered into the darkness. No answer, just silence, and something else. A presence. Emily rose shakily to her feet, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. She reached for her phone, but before her fingers touched it, a cold voice drifted out behind her. Don't move. Her blood froze. Emily turned her head slowly, so slowly it hurt, toward her bedroom. The closet door was open. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out, face hidden behind a black mask. He was holding something in his gloved hand. Her hospital files, the proof of her pregnancy. Emily's breath caught in her throat as he lifted them slightly, tilting his head like a predator amused by the fear in its prey. You should have listened, he whispered. Her scream never made it out of her mouth. A masked man steps out of her closet holding her hospital files and whispers, You should have listened. Emily's chest heaved, each inhale sharp and jagged, as the masked figure's words echoed through the room. Her body shook uncontrollably, and every nerve in her skin screamed danger. She realized with sudden clarity that she wasn't imagining this. This wasn't a dream. Before she could think, the figure lunged. A brutal force slammed into her side, knocking the air out of her lungs. Pain flared in her ribs as she fell to the floor. She tried to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Her eyes, wide with terror, searched desperately for something, anything, to fight back. The man's grip was iron, unyielding. He dragged her toward the bedroom wall. Emily's mind raced. Why? Who sent him? Then the shadow of a truth settled over her like ice. This had to be Blake's doing, or the Sloanes. The Sloane name carried weight, power, and ruthlessness. She felt a kick to her side, sharp, blinding. She curled into herself, trying to protect her stomach, trying to protect the tiny life growing inside. Every strike was methodical, precise, not random. This wasn't a robbery. This was punishment. You were warned, a low, menacing voice growled. You're lucky it's only tonight. The next time, you won't be so fortunate. Emily's vision blurred with tears, a mixture of rage and helplessness consuming her. She realized that no one would save her. Not Blake, not her friends, not anyone in Chicago's towering streets of glass and steel. The figure slammed her against the wall, twisting her arm painfully behind her back. Emily struggled to stay conscious, to fight, to think. This cannot be the end. Not like this. I have to protect my baby. Her thoughts flashed to her mother, working tirelessly at the hospital, and her brother, who had spent years building his auto shop from nothing. If they find out, if this leaks, they'll destroy them. Fear gripped her harder than pain ever could. Then, just as suddenly as the violence began, it stopped. The man stood over her, breathing heavily, face still concealed. Emily's body quivered, broken but alive. Her mind reeled. The silence afterward was almost worse than the attacks themselves. "You think you can hide anything?" the masked man hissed. "The Sloan family doesn't forgive. They don't forget. And neither do I." He tossed something at her feet. Emily glanced down, eyes wide. Her hospital records, her prenatal charts, detailed notes. All the proof of her pregnancy, everything Blake had tried to bury, now in the hands of a man she couldn't even see. A cold dread seeped into her bones. He knows everything. Then the figure was gone. Like a shadow slipping between walls, he vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving her sprawled on the floor, shaking, bleeding, and alone. It took hours before Emily could drag herself to her phone. Her hands were trembling too violently to dial with accuracy. When she finally managed to call 911, her words were barely a whisper. The paramedics arrived quickly, their calm voices both soothing and alien to her battered senses. The ride to the hospital blurred in a haze of sirens, sharp turns, and nausea. Emily stared at her reflection in the ambulance window, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Bruises marbled her face, her hair clung in wet strands to her cheeks, and her eyes were swollen and red. She hardly recognized herself. At the emergency room, doctors and nurses worked efficiently, checking her vitals, cleaning wounds, taking notes. Emily remained silent, silent in a way that was defiant yet hollow. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional torment was something else entirely. She thought of Blake, of the $75,000 check, of his cold eyes and his chilling ultimatum. He had not called, not once, not to ask if she was alive, not to ask if she was okay. His absence was deafening. She realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She had been abandoned, left to face this nightmare alone. Her body and mind screamed betrayal, grief, and anger all at once. Hours passed. Emily lay in a sterile hospital bed, her arm wrapped in bandages, bruises turning shades of purple and yellow across her skin. Every throb of pain in her body reminded her that this could have been worse. She should have been dead. And yet, she was alive. Somewhere in the shadows of her despair, a thought took root. A thought small, fragile, but undeniable. Survival. She had to survive. For herself, for her unborn child, for the family she wanted to protect. She thought of Chicago, of Blake Harrison, of the Sloan family's reach. They could find her anywhere. She had to disappear. She had to leave the city, leave the life she had known, leave behind the safety of familiarity. Her mind raced with possibilities. How could she vanish without trace? How could she build a new identity, a shield strong enough to protect herself and her child from men who had no conscience? She remembered the envelope of money Blake had given her. $75,000. Enough to start over. Not enough to live comfortably forever, she thought, but enough to run, to hide, to breathe. That night, she made a decision that would shape her entire future. She would leave Chicago. She would disappear from the lives of everyone who had caused her harm. She would protect her child at all costs. With trembling hands, she packed a small bag, leaving behind everything she had ever loved, everything that tied her to the life she knew. Her apartment, her old routines, her friends who would never know the dangers she had faced, all left behind. She contacted a friend who owed her a favor, someone with connections underground, legally gray, morally flexible. Within hours, Emily had a new identity in place. Emily Hale. A forged ID, a new social security number, a small apartment in a distant city. Her body ached, her spirit felt raw, but there was purpose in her exhaustion. She could do this. She would do this. On the morning of her departure, Emily left the hospital quietly, carefully avoiding attention. Each step toward the bus station felt like moving through molasses. Fear, adrenaline, and determination warred within her chest. When she finally arrived at the bus station, ticket clutched in trembling hands, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. This was it, the beginning of a new life, a life where she controlled her fate, where her child would be safe. She climbed the steps onto the bus, dragging her bag behind her. Relief washed through her, but it was fleeting, like sunlight behind clouds. Then a voice pierced through the morning air, frantic, desperate. "Emily! Emily Carter!" She froze. The sound of her old name, shouted from the crowd, cut through her heart like a knife. A nurse from the hospital, eyes wide and hand waving, ran toward her, waving a piece of paper. "You need to see this. It's about your father." Emily's heart skipped, her breath caught. She had left everything behind, and yet some part of her past had found her again. Fear, anticipation, and curiosity surged through her all at once. She gripped her bag tighter, torn between ignoring the voice and finding out what could possibly be more urgent than the nightmare she had just survived. The bus doors began to close. Emily hesitated, frozen. The nurse's eyes pleaded with her. The crowd around blurred into a haze, and all she could focus on was that desperate voice. Something about the urgency in the nurse's tone made Emily realize her life, the life she had fled from, was about to shift again. She had escaped one danger only to be drawn into another. The bus engine roared to life beneath her, and the tires squealed against the asphalt. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Her baby kicked faintly in her womb, a reminder that she was not alone, that she had to survive, that she had to move forward. And yet, that paper the nurse held, whatever news it contained, it was impossible to ignore. Emily took a deep, shuddering breath, the weight of her exhaustion pressing against her like a physical force. She had fought to leave the past behind, but now the past was calling her back. Her hand hovered over the railing of the bus door. Should she step onto the bus and leave, vanish again, or should she listen, even if it meant facing danger she wasn't prepared for? She looked down at her small bag, at her trembling hands, at the uncertain future before her. The decision would change everything. As Emily boards the bus, the nurse runs after her, screaming, "Emily, you need to see this. It's about your father." Emily sat frozen on the bus steps, the nurse's words looping in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. "It's about your father." Her stomach twisted, a mix of fear and dread tightening every muscle. She gripped her bag with white-knuckled hands, her baby stirring faintly inside her womb, a tiny reminder of life and vulnerability. She stepped off the bus, hesitation rooting her to the asphalt. The nurse approached, waving a folded envelope, her face pale and urgent. "Emily, you need to read this. Now." Emily's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar, formal. Her pulse surged, each beat deafening in her ears. She carefully opened it, unfolding the papers inside. Her eyes darted across the words, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. Her father, Richard Hale, the man she never knew, the tech mogul who had lived thousands of miles away, whose name had surfaced only once or twice in casual conversation when she was a child. He had died. Recently, unexpectedly. And he had left her everything: a trust, a luxurious penthouse in San Francisco, partial ownership of a rising venture capital firm. The weight of it hit her like a physical blow. She pressed a hand to her chest. How could this be real? She had fled danger, fled Blake, fled the city that had tried to break her. And now, the world she had thought was closed to her had opened in a way she couldn't even imagine. Tears blurred her vision, not the soft, helpless tears of grief, but the burning, fierce tears of opportunity and resolve. A spark ignited inside her, a fire she hadn't known she possessed. She was tired of being powerless. She was tired of running. And she was determined, more than ever, to build a life that no one could take away. Emily took a deep breath and allowed herself to imagine something she hadn't dared before. A life where she controlled her fate. A life where her daughter, Arya, would be safe. A life where she was not prey, but predator. The nurse looked at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Are you going to go?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. She had to. She had a decision to make. Chicago was no longer safe, and her presence there was a liability. She would move across the country to the city promised in the papers. San Francisco. A fresh start. A city of fog, of hills, of possibility. Every detail mattered. Emily carefully planned her journey. She took the bus, the train, then a flight. She moved quietly, carrying only essentials, her documents, and her growing resolve. Each mile brought her closer to freedom and further from the danger that had almost ended her life. When she arrived, the penthouse was even more stunning than she had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bay, fog rolling over the water in thick waves. Sunlight reflected off the glass buildings in the distance, turning the city into a shimmering landscape of opportunity. Emily wandered through the vast apartment, touching the sleek counters, the marble floors, the untouched furniture. Everything smelled of new beginnings, and yet of absence, her father's absence, a life never shared, a wealth she hadn't earned yet felt responsibility for. She found the keys to the venture capital firm hidden in a drawer, along with letters from Richard Hale. Words of encouragement, belief in her abilities, instructions to claim her inheritance. He had known she existed, had cared in his own way, had left her a foundation she never dreamed of. Emily's heart pounded. She had survived violence, betrayal, and fear. And now she had power, the kind that could protect her and her daughter. Months passed as Emily transformed the inheritance into a lifeline. She rented a modest apartment temporarily, learned the intricacies of the venture firm, and made discreet hires. She met with lawyers, accountants, and advisors, piecing together the empire her father had left. She was still pregnant, but each step she took toward independence, toward mastery of this new world, strengthened her resolve. Giving birth to Arya was terrifying and miraculous. Emily had anticipated pain, fear, and uncertainty, but she had also anticipated a moment of awakening. Holding her daughter for the first time, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own, Emily realized that everything she had endured had led to this. Arya's cries were a symphony of life, of hope, of responsibility. Emily's tears fell freely as she whispered promises into her daughter's hair. She would never let anyone harm her. She would protect her, love her, and teach her strength. With the inheritance, Emily began to establish a shield around their new life. She purchased a modest house within walking distance of good schools, invested in health insurance, and quietly started to expand the venture firm. She adopted a new identity officially: Emily Hale. She was no longer the frightened assistant in Chicago. She was a woman building an empire from the ashes of betrayal. Across the country, Blake Harrison married Victoria Sloan. Their union was a spectacle, the merger complete. Blake's career flourished in the public eye, but privately, nothing felt right. Power and wealth could not fill the hollowness he carried inside. His marriage was cold, calculated, devoid of warmth or love. The success he had chased his entire life tasted like ash on his tongue, each victory shadowed by what he had lost and what he had created through cruelty. Meanwhile, Emily's transformation continued. Her body recovered from childbirth, but it was the fire in her mind that mattered most. Every day she woke, she strategized, she learned, she planned. She was determined to never be powerless again. She had resources, intelligence, and instinct. She would not merely survive, she would dominate the spaces she once feared. She tutored herself in finance, mergers, and acquisitions. She began attending small networking events, each handshake a calculated move, each smile a shield. She was subtle, quiet, but relentless. Arya became her anchor, her reason, her mission. Every step Emily took was for the life of her daughter, a child she would never allow to face the terror she had endured. Emily also felt a growing fire within her. Not revenge, at least not yet, but a fierce recognition of her own power. Blake Harrison had underestimated her. The world had underestimated her. Now, with resources and knowledge in hand, Emily was poised to step into a life she had only dreamed of. She learned to navigate the intricacies of the firm, meeting with board members, reviewing investments, and quietly asserting her presence. Her instincts, honed by fear and survival, made her a formidable force. People noticed her sharp intellect, her precision, her ability to anticipate moves before they happened. Her network grew. Lawyers, investors, consultants, all became threads in the web she was weaving. Emily Hale was no longer a shadow of someone else's world. She was the architect of her own destiny. Through sleepless nights and quiet moments of fear, she nurtured Arya, sang lullabies in the dim light, and whispered promises of strength and courage. Each day brought new challenges, but Emily faced them with clarity, determination, and a controlled intensity that left no room for doubt. 5 years passed. Emily had built a life that was safe, formidable, and unassailable. Arya thrived, bright, curious, and loved beyond measure. Emily's firm was respected, her presence commanding. She had transformed from prey to predator, from frightened assistant to powerful, self-made woman. And yet, in the midst of this success, Emily could not forget Chicago entirely. The memory of Blake Harrison lingered, of his betrayal, his threat, his cold ultimatum. She had survived him once. She had built a fortress against him. But fate, as it often does, had a way of collapsing walls when least expected. It was at a technology summit, a gathering of innovators, investors, and titans of industry, that her past collided with her present. Emily, holding Arya's hand, moved through the crowd, her presence calm, controlled, poised. She felt eyes on her, but it was impossible to prepare for what came next. Blake Harrison, standing at the podium, mid-speech, froze. His words caught in his throat. His eyes widened. For the first time in years, power, money, and status could not mask the shock that reverberated through him. Because standing before him, with the poise and authority he had never granted her, was Emily Hale, and beside her the little girl with eyes so impossibly like his own, Arya. Blake's heart hammered in a way it hadn't in years. A cold, sharp awareness cut through him. Everything he thought he controlled had slipped through his fingers, and he had no idea what this woman, this force of nature, would do next. 5 years later, at a tech summit, Blake freezes mid-speech because he sees a woman walk in who looks exactly like Emily, holding a little girl. The moment Blake Harrison's eyes met Emily Hale's, the room seemed to shrink around them. A sudden stillness fell over the tech summit. The crowd around him blurred into insignificance. Every sharp movement, every polite clap, every quiet whisper faded into nothingness. Only Emily and the child beside her existed in his vision. Arya's tiny hand clutched Emily's finger tightly, her dark hair catching the light as she looked curiously at the man she had never known. Her wide eyes, so like Blake's, seemed to pierce him through some invisible mirror of recognition he had never anticipated. It was a heartbeat of revelation that left Blake paralyzed, every ounce of control he had pried from his years of calculated power slipping from his grasp. Emily's gaze was cold, unflinching. She stood tall, poised, every movement deliberate, every step radiating the authority she had cultivated over 5 years of survival and reinvention. Blake's presence was a shadow that threatened to intrude upon her carefully constructed life, and she would not allow it. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure, but the words felt foreign on his tongue. "Emily," he started, voice wavering, lips barely forming the name. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Blake's panic was answer enough. Every second he lingered in that frozen gaze of hers, he felt a fear he had never experienced before, a sense of helplessness. He realized that time had changed the balance. She was no longer the vulnerable assistant he had threatened, no longer the frightened woman who had endured his cold ultimatum. She was something else entirely, something formidable, something he could not control. Blake's pulse quickened. Every instinct in him screamed to reach out, to regain a connection, to assert dominance. But Emily's security detail, silent, vigilant, perfectly positioned, blocked every step. Even his influence could not penetrate the perimeter she had built around herself and her daughter. Victoria Sloane, seated a few rows back, noticed the shift immediately. Her sharp instincts, honed over years of political maneuvering and corporate strategy, picked up on Blake's distraction. Her lips tightened into a thin line. Something had shifted, something she had not accounted for. And then there was Carter Sloane, Blake's brother-in-law and Victoria's enforcer, a man whose name carried fear in political circles, had already begun quietly making inquiries. Discreet phone calls, subtle background checks, connections stirring behind the scenes, all to uncover why Blake's once untouchable world had suddenly become unstable. Emily knew all of this. Every move, every shadowy whisper, every potential threat she anticipated. Her 5 years of rebuilding had taught her to expect, to prepare, to survive. And now, with Blake Harrison standing frozen in the room before her, the game had begun anew. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, holding Arya's hand firmly. Her voice, low and steady, carried across the space between them, though no one else could hear the weight behind it. "Stay away." Blake's throat tightened. The words were simple, but the conviction in them shattered every pretense he had built around his life. He wanted to argue, to insist, to demand answers, but he could not. Not in this room, not under the unrelenting authority she radiated. He tried later, over email, over phone. Messages blocked by encrypted servers, numbers redirected, calls never going through. Every attempt to breach her new life was met with barriers he could neither anticipate nor bypass. Panic gnawed at him. This was a woman transformed. This was not the Emily he had known. And when the truth of the past, the attack orchestrated by his own family, carried out by Carter Sloane, reached him in detail, rage combined with guilt consumed him. He had been blind. He had been arrogant. And now he faced the consequences of a history he had chosen to ignore. Emily's hatred was no longer quiet, simmering anger. It was fierce, calculated, and unrelenting. Every smile she gave at board meetings, every handshake she offered to investors, every calm, precise decision she made within her venture firm was a thread woven into a plan designed to dismantle Blake's empire piece by piece. Every day, Blake felt the pressure mounting. The media whispered about shifts in Harrison Industries' stock. Rivals he had underestimated began circling like predators. Small setbacks, subtle manipulations, financial leaks, all orchestrated by Emily's strategic mind. Blake tried to regain control within Harrison Industries, But every move he made was anticipated, every decision countered. Emily's influence, though invisible to most, extended like a web throughout the company. And the harder he fought, the more his world began to fracture. Victoria noticed every crack forming in her husband's confidence. Her sharp, calculating mind recognized the threat before Blake did, and she did not like it. Carter Sloane quietly intensified his investigations, digging into Emily Hale's past, tracing connections, and probing vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Emily stood in her office at the venture firm, reviewing financial statements, legal filings, and investment strategies. Her calm demeanor masked the intensity beneath. Every piece of Harrison Industries' structure that had once been untouchable now had a weakness she could exploit. She smiled faintly, her gaze resting on Arya sleeping in her crib at home. This was the reason for everything. Every sleepless night, every calculated maneuver, every sacrifice, it was all for this child. Her daughter would never know fear, betrayal, or powerlessness. Emily made calls, drafted emails, arranged meetings with allies, and quietly positioned herself as a force no one could ignore. Harrison Industries was about to feel the ripple effects of a woman who had survived betrayal, violence, and abandonment, and now wielded the power her father had left her. Blake's obsession grew with every passing day. He no longer simply desired Emily. He needed to understand, to control, to reclaim. But Emily, powerful, fearless, and precise, was always one step ahead. And as she planned her next moves, Emily began compiling a confidential file, a single folder labeled simply, deliberately, Phase 1, Dismantle Harrison Industries. The quiet, precise preparation carried the weight of years of suffering, of resilience, and of absolute control. She had learned from the past. She had built for the future. And now her strategy would unfold with the inevitability of a storm descending upon the city. The summit had ended, the crowds dispersed, but Emily's mind was already moving. Each contact she had made, each observation recorded, each secret kept, all pieces of a puzzle only she could assemble. Harrison Industries, once untouchable, would face consequences orchestrated with surgical precision. Blake tried again to reach her. Calls, texts, emails, each one met with silence or automated blocks. The obsession consumed him, and yet every attempt only tightened the trap Emily had constructed. She watched him from a distance in public events, noting his distractions, his hesitation, the flicker of recognition in his eyes whenever she moved past him. It was satisfying, and yet it was merely the beginning. Her vengeance was not reckless. It was not emotional in a way that could be exploited. It was deliberate, strategic, and utterly unstoppable. Harrison Industries would fall, not because of her anger, but because she had transformed her trauma into power, her fear into mastery, her pain into precise action. Emily knew Blake's weakness. She had watched him, studied him, catalogued his reactions. Every misstep, every oversight, every arrogance-laced decision was an opening she would exploit. Arya, sleeping quietly in her crib at home, was the anchor that kept Emily grounded. Every maneuver, every strategic move, every whispered plan was for her daughter's safety and future. And yet there was a thrill in it, a quiet, deadly satisfaction in knowing that the man who had tried to destroy her life now faced the consequences of underestimating her. Emily's plan was no longer just survival. It was supremacy. It was reclamation. It was the final collision between the powerless girl, once beaten and terrified, and the woman who now commanded resources, knowledge, and an unbreakable will. She finalized the documents in her office, carefully reviewing every page. Every number, every note, every contract, every loophole had been examined and reinforced. Phase 1 would not fail. It was a precise, calculated strike, designed to dismantle the empire Blake had built with arrogance and cruelty. Her hand hovered over the send button, heart steady, pulse calm, mind sharp. The moment was both terrifying and exhilarating. She knew that after this, nothing would ever be the same. Harrison Industries, Blake Harrison, Victoria Sloan, and Carter Sloan, all of them, were about to enter a world they could not anticipate. And Emily, the woman they had underestimated, would watch the foundations crumble, every move orchestrated to perfection. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a mixture of triumph and icy determination. She had waited 5 years for this. Every day of fear, every night of anxiety, every ounce of effort. It had led to this moment. She pressed the folder into her secure server, encrypted and ready to deploy. The first ripple of the storm had begun. Emily attends a board meeting where she submits a confidential file labeled Phase 1, Dismantle Harrison Industries. The moment Emily Hale pressed send on the encrypted folder, a quiet storm began to ripple across Harrison Industries. It was subtle at first, a missed meeting, a stock dip, murmurs among executives, but Emily had planned every detail. Years of survival, study, and observation crystallized into this precise, calculated strike. She leaned back in her chair, hands folded, eyes fixed on the monitors, displaying the first tremors of chaos. Investors had already started asking questions, probing cracks in Blake's empire. She had anticipated every reaction. Every leak, every misstep, every panic-stricken decision from Blake was a domino she had carefully positioned. Victoria Sloan, poised and elegant in public, felt the undercurrent of discontent growing within Harrison Industries. Behind closed doors, she whispered to advisors, questioning Blake's competence. His calculated empire, built on intimidation and charm, was starting to crumble, and he had no idea who was orchestrating it. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard as she coordinated meetings, made calls, and subtly leaked documents to Blake's rivals. Every deal she exposed, every suspicious transaction she highlighted, built a chain reaction that threatened the foundation of his empire. Stockholders started pulling out. The media caught wind of irregularities. Speculators whispered about instability, and the once solid Harrison Industries stock wavered, teetering. Blake's phone rang incessantly. Advisors begged him to manage the crisis, to calm investors, to salvage the reputation he had built with so much ruthlessness. But every move he made was countered, every call intercepted, every email blocked. Emily was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost with a deadly purpose. His desperation grew with each passing day. He began scouring social media, combing through online mentions, trying to find a trace of Emily. Every email he sent, every text he drafted went unanswered, filtered through encrypted firewalls and security layers. Blake's obsession became palpable. He stopped sleeping properly, began missing important meetings, and snapped at trusted colleagues. The empire he had controlled with precision for years now seemed to exist without him, collapsing piece by piece. Emily watched it unfold from her office, every detail feeding a sense of triumph and empowerment she had never felt before. She was no longer the frightened woman of Chicago, no longer a victim of threats and violence. She was a strategist, a force, a protector of her child, and a woman who would not allow her life, or Arya's life, to be dictated by a man like Blake. Blake began making mistakes that were uncharacteristic, uncalculated. He fired loyal executives in frustration. He attempted risky mergers without proper research. Every misstep fueled Emily's advantage. She was careful, meticulous, patient. This was not revenge born of emotion. It was revenge born of mastery and precision. Victoria, sensing the unraveling of her husband's empire, grew increasingly anxious. Her political family began to whisper, asking questions that Blake could no longer answer confidently. Meetings became hostile. Advisors muttered about instability. Carter Sloane's subtle investigations revealed fragments of Emily's rise. He passed information to Victoria, adding another layer of pressure. Blake, once untouchable, felt trapped. He had underestimated Emily Hale, underestimated the consequences of underestimating someone who had survived everything he had thrown at her. Emily's strategy extended beyond financial domination. She subtly influenced public opinion, arranged interviews with former associates of Harrison Industries, and leaked information that exposed unethical practices. Blake's public image began to crumble. Former allies distanced themselves. Investors panicked. The boardroom, once a place of command, became a battlefield of doubt and accusation. Blake's carefully curated facade of confidence eroded in real time. He became unstable, obsessive, irrational. Late nights were spent obsessively tracking Emily's online presence, desperate for any clue of her location. Emails demanding explanations went unanswered. Messages threatening her legal action bounced back. Emily, meanwhile, maintained her calm. Every action was calculated, measured. She watched from afar, monitoring the ripple effect of each strategic move. She could feel Blake's desperation like a storm approaching. And she knew, as any strategist knows, that panic made men predictable. The thrill of control, the intoxicating sense of safety and empowerment coursed through her. She had faced violence, betrayal, and fear, and now she was orchestrating the downfall of a man who had once believed himself invincible. Arya, oblivious to the chaos surrounding them, played in her room under Emily's watchful eye. The child was her anchor, the reason for her careful precision, the reason she could not afford a misstep. Emily's vengeance was a slow, deliberate symphony. Each day brought a new crescendo: Harrison Industries losing deals, investors withdrawing confidence, Blake's public image deteriorating. Every failed attempt to reach her fed the growing hysteria in him. The media picked up on internal instability. Rumors became headlines. Articles speculated about leadership crises, unethical practices, and internal conflicts. Blake's empire, built on fear, intimidation, and charisma, began to collapse under the weight of strategic exposure. Emily's satisfaction was tempered only by caution. She knew that pushing too far too fast could backfire. She was careful, patient, precise. Every move was deliberate, designed to maximize impact while maintaining control. Blake's obsession turned dangerous. He began showing up near locations he thought Emily might be. He attempted to track Arya through school records, social media mentions, and even hired private investigators. Emily tightened her security. Each potential threat was neutralized before it could escalate. She moved with stealth, intelligence, and foresight. Every step she took was in preparation for the possibility that Blake would cross the line. And then he did. The call came from Arya's preschool. Emily had just finished reviewing the latest financial statements when her phone rang, the tone urgent and unfamiliar. She answered immediately, sensing instinctively that something had changed. "Ma'am," the voice trembled slightly on the line, "Blake Harrison is here, demanding to see your daughter." Emily froze, the color draining from her face. The carefully constructed barrier around her life, the security she had meticulously arranged, was under threat. Her mind raced. Blake had crossed every line. He had moved from obsession to intrusion. She gripped the phone tightly, her knuckles white. Every ounce of her past fear, every memory of violence, surged to the surface. And yet, beneath that fear was the fierce, calculated resolve that had brought her to this moment. Emily knew that this was the ultimate test. Blake had challenged her boundaries. He had endangered her child. And now every strategy she had cultivated, every skill she had honed would be put to the test. Her pulse raced, but her mind was clear. This was no longer about survival. This was about protecting her daughter and finishing the reckoning she had begun. Emily could feel the storm approaching, the collision between the woman she had become and the man who had once held power over her life. Every step, every decision in the coming hours would define the future, not just for her, but for Arya. Her eyes narrowed, determination blazing. Blake Harrison would learn in no uncertain terms that some lines could never be crossed, that some forces, once awakened, could not be contained. And with that realization, Emily moved swiftly. She began coordinating security, alerting trusted allies, and preparing for the confrontation she had long anticipated. This was no longer a game of business or finance. This was personal, and the personal stakes had just escalated to the highest possible level. Emily's heart pounded as she raced through the streets toward the preschool, her mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and resolve. Every second felt stretched, elongated, as if time itself was conspiring against her. The city's bustle faded into a distant hum. Only one thought burned in her mind. Aria. The moment she reached the front door, she saw him. Blake Harrison standing rigid, face pale, eyes glistening with unsteady tears. He looked broken in a way she had never seen before, not the composed, arrogant man who had ruled boardrooms and controlled lives, but fragile, desperate, almost pitiful. Her first instinct was protective. She barged past the receptionist, ignoring the startled staff, and found Aria sitting in a corner of the playroom, clutching her doll. Relief surged through Emily in an instant. "Aria," she called, voice trembling but steady. The little girl looked up, eyes wide, then ran into her arms. Blake stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his voice cracking. "Emily, please. I just wanted to see her. Once. Just once. That's all. I'm her father." Emily's gaze hardened. She could see the raw emotion flickering across his face, but she also saw the obsession, the entitlement, the unyielding need to control. This was not love. It had never been love. Not for Aria, not for her. She held Aria close, rocking her gently. "You've had your chance," Emily said firmly. "This ends now." Her voice was calm, controlled, but every word carried the weight of the past 5 years. Every threat, every assault, every manipulation, it all converged in that single moment of confrontation. Blake dropped to his knees, gripping the edge of the counter, sobbing openly. "I didn't know. I... His voice broke, and Emily tuned it out. There was no apology that could undo the fear he had instilled in her, no plea that could erase the past. Emily took out her phone. Her hand was steady, unwavering. She dialed the number of her attorney and calmly gave instructions. Within the hour, the restraining order was filed. Blake Harrison would have no access to her or Aria. No lingering, no manipulation, no intrusion. The weeks that followed were a study in unraveling. Blake's world began to crumble in ways he had never imagined. Harrison Industries, already teetering from Emily's strategic assaults, was caught in a hostile takeover engineered by her subtle manipulations. Every financial report, every board decision, every investor panic was a direct consequence of the woman he had underestimated. Victoria Sloan, caught between politics and corporate disaster, withdrew her support. Her political empire began to fracture, leaving Blake exposed and isolated. Carter Sloan's investigations failed to find leverage, his efforts rendered useless against Emily's meticulous planning. Blake's marriage collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny, internal discord, and the impossibility of his situation. His reputation, once untouchable, was shredded in articles, analyses, and whispered conversations in boardrooms across Chicago. He had been dethroned, not through scandal alone, but through precision, strategy, and the unstoppable force of a woman he had wronged. Depression engulfed him. For the first time in decades, Blake Harrison faced life without control. The empire he had built, the life he had manipulated into perfection, had disintegrated before his eyes. And there was no one to blame but himself. Emily, meanwhile, moved forward with her life. She did not gloat, nor did she celebrate the destruction she had wrought. Her victory was quiet, measured, and purposeful. She focused on her daughter, on building their future, and on ensuring that the trauma of the past would never touch them again. Arya thrived. She laughed, she learned. She grew in a home filled with safety, love, and the security Emily had fought tirelessly to construct. Every bedtime story, every whispered lullaby, every gentle kiss was a shield against the darkness they had escaped. Emily herself felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The constant tension, the fear, the vigilance, all had faded, replaced by a deliberate calm, a new rhythm. She trusted her instincts, her planning, her judgment. She had mastered survival, and now mastery of her life felt almost effortless. Blake Harrison, removed from the city, vanished into obscurity. He traveled, attempted therapy, attempted work, but the damage he had sustained, professionally, personally, and emotionally, was irreversible. Chicago no longer had a place for him. He became a shadow of the man he had once been, a cautionary tale whispered in financial circles, a reminder that power without conscience could crumble unexpectedly. Emily monitored the news occasionally, noting his absence with detached awareness. She felt no malice now, only cautious relief. The danger had passed, or so she thought. Months rolled by. Autumn faded into winter, and the quiet life Emily had carved out continued undisturbed. Arya's laughter echoed through their home, the warmth of the fireplace blending with the warmth of their bond. Emily took long walks with her daughter, taught her letters, numbers, and life lessons she wished she had learned herself. She reflected on her journey, the terror of Chicago, the betrayal, the assault, the inheritance, the empowerment. Each memory was a reminder of her resilience, her resourcefulness, and the extraordinary lengths she had gone to protect the life of her child. Even in moments of solitude, Emily allowed herself to feel pride. Not the arrogant pride of dominance, but the quiet, deep pride of survival, of transformation, of emerging from darkness into strength. But life, as it often does, has a way of challenging even the strongest fortresses. Emily had thought herself safe. She had built walls, systems, and contingencies that no one could breach. And then, one quiet evening, the unexpected happened. Emily was in the kitchen preparing Arya's dinner when she heard the thump, soft but urgent. She turned, expecting her daughter to be playing with a toy, only to see Arya collapse, clutching her chest, face pale, eyes wide with panic. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, memories of past fears flashing through her mind, mixing with an instinctive surge of maternal panic. "Arya, sweetheart, look at me," she called, voice shaking but firm, as she scooped the child into her arms. The tiny voice that followed was soft, fragile, and terrifying. "Mommy, I can't breathe." Every ounce of strength, every learned strategy, every experience of survival surged through Emily as she realized that the battles she had fought in the past were nothing compared to the sudden raw terror of protecting her child in this moment. Emily's hands shook as she dialed emergency services. Her heart thundered, her mind whirling through possible diagnoses, treatments, and contingencies. She refused to panic, but the fear was visceral, primal, a reminder that even the most meticulous planning could be upended by life's unexpected blows. She held Arya close, whispering reassurances, guiding her gently, praying silently that help would arrive in time. Her mind catalogued every symptom, every detail, every subtle shift in color or breath. For the first time in years, Emily realized that control was fragile. Power, wealth, strategy. They meant nothing against the raw unpredictability of life. And yet, her resolve, sharpened by years of survival and reinvention, gave her focus. She would not allow fear to paralyze her. She would act. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, and Emily guided them through Arya's condition, explaining every observation with clarity and precision. The paramedics worked swiftly, stabilizing her daughter, but Emily's mind raced ahead, calculating risks, potential complications, and what must be done next. In the quiet moments that followed, as Arya was rushed to the ambulance, Emily's hands gripped the straps of her bag, knuckles white. The world she had built, the safety she had meticulously arranged, suddenly felt perilously fragile. Her gaze hardened. She had faced Blake Harrison, corporate empires, betrayal, and violence. She had survived. She had triumphed. But this sudden, terrifying vulnerability in the one thing she loved most, was a reminder that life's battles were never truly over. And as the ambulance doors closed, Emily whispered a vow, fierce and unwavering. She would protect Arya, no matter the cost, no matter the challenge, no matter the force standing in her way. 2 months later, Arya collapses at home, clutching her chest and whispering, "Mommy, I can't breathe." Emily's heart pounded in her chest like a drum of impending doom as the paramedics rushed Arya into the emergency bay. Every step, every sound, the wail of the siren, the hiss of oxygen, the frantic instructions of the medical team hit her like a hammer. Her mind raced, a storm of fear, calculation, and desperate hope. Arya's tiny hand was still clutched in hers, limp and fragile. Her pale lips trembled as she whispered, "Mommy, it hurts. I can't breathe." Emily's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed. Every memory of past battles surged to the forefront. She had survived Blake Harrison, survived betrayal, survived physical assault and emotional torment. But this, the sight of her child gasping, struggling for life, was unlike anything she had ever faced. It was raw. It was primal. It demanded every ounce of her courage and focus. She gripped Arya tightly as the paramedics whisked her onto a gurney. "Hold on, baby girl. Mommy's right here," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Her mind was already cataloging symptoms, breathing patterns, skin color. Every detail mattered. The emergency team moved swiftly, attaching monitors, administering oxygen, and calling in specialists. Emily hovered, feeling simultaneously helpless and hyper-aware. Every second was critical. Every delay could be catastrophic. The attending doctor approached her, face serious, eyes heavy with concern. "Ma'am, your daughter has a congenital heart defect. She'll need immediate surgery, and we require her paternal medical history. Genetics could affect the procedure." Emily's hands shook violently. Her mind froze. The one person who held that information was Blake Harrison, the man she had spent years building her life apart from, the man who had once threatened everything she loved. A bitter taste filled her mouth, but necessity overrode pride, fear, and resentment. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, dialed the number she swore she would never call. The line rang once, twice, and then Blake answered on the first ring. "Emily?" His voice was cautious, unsure, almost reverent. "Emily, is it serious?" Her chest tightened. "It's Arya. She needs you. Her surgery, her genetic history. It's critical. I need your medical records. Now." Blake's silence stretched over the line for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then, steady and deliberate, he spoke. "I'm on a flight. I'll bring everything, specialists, surgeons, records, whatever she needs." "Emily, I—" Emily cut him off, controlling her shaking voice. "Just come, please. It's life or death." Within hours, Blake arrived in San Francisco, his once imposing presence softened, humbled by fear and concern for his daughter. He carried himself differently. No arrogance, no entitlement, just urgency and genuine worry. For the first time in years, Emily saw him stripped of ego, of power, of pretense. Blake coordinated with the medical team, offering records, insights, and even private contacts to ensure Arya received the best possible care. Emily watched, arms crossed, silently observing. He moved with a single-minded focus, not for himself, not for redemption, but for Arya. She felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, relief, suspicion, and something she didn't want to name. The man who had once threatened her life, once wielded power over her, was now here, vulnerable and earnest, praying under his breath in the hospital hallway. Emily kept her distance, protecting herself and her daughter. But she could not ignore the scene. Blake Harrison, the man she had feared and despised, whispering a silent plea, hands clasped tightly, every muscle taut with worry. The hours stretched on, the surgical team preparing meticulously, double-checking every detail. Emily hovered near Arya, holding her tiny hand, brushing back the wisps of hair from her pale face, murmuring reassurances that she hoped would reach past fear and pain. Blake moved silently alongside the team, observing, listening, offering information only when necessary, deferring to the doctor's expertise. His pride was absent. Only concern remained. He was not a hero. He was simply a father. Emily felt a strange tension in the air, a fragile truce born not of forgiveness but of necessity. The child's life had bridged a chasm neither of them could ignore. And yet, neither spoke of reconciliation. Not yet, not in the sterile hospital corridors filled with the hum of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses. Finally, after hours of preparation, the surgeons wheeled Arya into the operating room. Emily followed closely, holding the edge of the gurney until the last moment, whispering encouragements, kisses to her forehead, promises of safety. Blake followed as well, observing silently, offering information, stepping back when asked. Emily watched him and felt an unfamiliar pang, acknowledgement of his humanity, tempered by the bitter memories of the past. As the operating room doors closed, Emily sank into a chair in the waiting area. Her hands trembled, clutching a blanket, her mind racing through possibilities, risks, and outcomes. She had survived horrors before, but this, the potential loss of her daughter, was different. It was personal in a way no corporate battle or betrayal had ever been. Hours passed, each tick of the clock a hammer against her chest. Blake sat across from her, silent, eyes red-rimmed, whispering prayers under his breath. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not demand gratitude. He simply existed in that space, focused entirely on their child. Emily's mind replayed every past encounter, every threat, every moment he had been the source of fear. And yet, in the shadow of this crisis, she could not ignore the reality. He was acting selflessly, with purpose, with clarity. The waiting room felt suffocating. Nurses moved past with charts, doctors whispered in hushed tones, monitors beeped faintly from the adjacent rooms. Every sound was amplified in Emily's mind. Every footstep, every muffled conversation was a potential announcement of life or death. She refused to cry. She refused to succumb to panic. She focused on her breathing, on Arya, on the thin line between hope and despair. She had built her life to survive, to protect, to triumph, and now every skill she had honed would be tested in a single moment. Blake, too, seemed transformed. Gone was the arrogance, the control, the manipulative charm. What remained was a father's fear, a man grappling with consequences, a parent staring into the unknown with a desperate heart. And then, after what felt like an eternity, a figure emerged from the operating room. The surgeon's expression was unreadable, eyes dark, mouth tight. Emily and Blake rose instinctively, hearts pounding in unison. The room fell silent, the machine's beeps fading into the background. The surgeon spoke, voice low, heavy with gravity. "We need to talk about Arya." The surgeon steps out with an unreadable expression. "We need to talk about Arya." Emily sat by Arya's bedside, holding her tiny hand, feeling the steady rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Each breath was a miracle, each flutter of eyelids a victory she had fought tooth and nail to achieve. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and relentless vigilance had led to this moment. the one thing she had lived for, her child's survival. Arya's small eyes slowly opened, searching, blinking against the harsh light of the hospital room. Her gaze landed on Blake Harrison, sitting quietly in the corner, hands folded, posture tense yet careful, respectful of the distance Emily demanded. "Mommy, who is he?" Arya's voice was soft, innocent, and Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Emily inhaled, steadying herself. Years of betrayal, fear, and fury coursed through her mind, but now it was tempered by clarity and purpose. She looked at Blake, saw the man who had caused unspeakable pain, and then looked at her daughter, the reason she had endured everything. "He is your father," Emily said softly, each word deliberate, careful, weighted with truth, but free of sentiment. "That's all you need to know for now." Blake's eyes met hers briefly, dark with unspoken emotion. He nodded, silent, as though he understood every boundary, every rule, every limit she was enforcing. There was no plea for forgiveness, no request for a second chance, only the quiet recognition of responsibility, of consequence, and of a life he could not reclaim. Emily had survived him, survived the threats, the violence, the manipulation. She had built a life of independence and power, and she had kept Arya safe. That truth gave her a calm strength she had never felt before, a sense of absolute control over her own destiny. Arya reached out a tiny hand toward Blake, curiosity and instinct mingling in her gaze. Blake's hand hovered, then gently rested atop hers. The contact was tentative, respectful. He did not overstep. He did not demand. He only existed in the space her daughter allowed. "Do you want me to read you a story?" Blake asked, voice low and trembling, betraying the fear he felt for the little girl before him. Emily hesitated, but finally nodded. "You may. Keep it short. Just this once. Supervised." Blake picked up the book, voice shaking initially, but gradually steadying as he read aloud. The cadence, the rhythm, the gentle pauses, each word a bridge between father and child, a moment of connection forged not from past sins but from the fragile present. Emily watched him closely. For the first time, she saw not the man who had destroyed her life, not the millionaire whose threats had haunted her for years, but a broken human being attempting to fix one thing he still could, their daughter's heart. Arya listened intently, occasionally glancing at Emily, her small face filled with wonder. The sound of her laughter, faint but genuine, was a balm to Emily's battered soul, a reminder of why she had fought, why she had survived, and why she had risen from the ashes of fear and manipulation. Emily felt the weight of power settle within her, not corporate, not financial, but the power of choice. She chose who entered their lives, who mattered, and how the future would be shaped. She had kept Arya safe, built her own empire, and risen above the chaos Blake had tried to impose. Blake finished the story, closing the book gently, eyes misty. He handed it to Emily with a reverent nod, as though offering a peace token rather than asking for approval. "Thank you," he said simply, voice raw, "for for allowing this moment." Emily's response was quiet, firm, but not unkind. "This is for Arya, nothing more. You will not overstep. You will not manipulate. Understand?" Blake nodded again, solemn, aware of the boundaries she had set. There was no lingering tension, no flash of arrogance, no attempt to reclaim control, just acknowledgement of the rules and a willingness to respect them. Outside the hospital room, life continued. Footsteps, chatter, the hum of machines. But within these walls, a delicate equilibrium had been established. Emily had won. She had protected her child, asserted her authority, and ensured her safety above all else. She reflected on the journey. Every threat from Blake, every attack from Victoria's brother, the years of hiding, the inheritance, the rise from poverty to power. Each moment had led to this, a daughter alive, a father restrained, and a mother in control. Her empire, her accomplishments, her self-made power were not trophies for vanity. They were shields, weapons, and lifelines that ensured she would never be victimized again. She understood now that real strength was not revenge alone, but mastery over one's own life and choices. Emily allowed herself a rare moment of calm. Arya's small hand squeezed hers, and she smiled, feeling the profound love that had fueled every decision, every sacrifice, every battle she had endured. Blake watched silently, accepting his role in this new dynamic, a parent present but constrained by boundaries. His posture suggested both reverence and regret, a man learning humility in the shadow of the life he had helped create but failed to protect until now. Emily knew the future was uncertain. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, nor did she expect perfection. There would be challenges, questions from Arya as she grew, perhaps even confrontations with Blake in the years to come. But she also knew one truth that no one could take away. She had triumphed. Her daughter was alive. Her choices had been honored. Her past could no longer control her. And in that, Emily found a peace she had never known, the quiet thrill of absolute sovereignty over her own life. Blake's presence in the room was neither comforting nor threatening. It was simply reality, and Emily had the power to define what role he would play moving forward. She was the gatekeeper of this fragile new life they all shared. Arya stirred, eyes fluttering open again. "Mommy, can he stay?" she whispered. Emily considered the question carefully, weighing the safety, the boundaries, the lesson in trust and responsibility. Her voice was calm but resolute. "For now, but only because it's safe and supervised, always under my watch." Blake nodded, silently agreeing. He had no right to more than this, no claim beyond what Emily allowed. His eyes betrayed longing, guilt, and a flicker of hope. But he knew better than to overstep. Emily breathed deeply, feeling the enormity of the moment. This was no fairy tale ending. There were no romantic reunions, no easy forgiveness, only a fragile, complicated new beginning built on one undeniable truth. She had survived. She had won. She had built a life on her terms. And now, for the first time in years, she could look forward without fear. Arya giggled softly, curling into Emily's arms, and Emily whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." The hospital room, filled with the soft beeping of monitors, the faint scent of antiseptic, and the quiet presence of Blake Harrison, became the starting point of a new chapter, one defined not by fear or revenge, but by love, resilience, and the uncompromising power of a mother who had fought and prevailed. Emily knew this was just the beginning. She would define what came next, not Blake, not the past, but her own choices and the future she would shape for Arya. Her eyes met Blake's one last time in that room, a silent acknowledgement of the past, the consequences, and the boundaries of the present. No words were needed. The understanding was complete. She turned back to Arya, brushing the hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her daughter's small body against her own. And in that simple, profound moment, Emily Hale realized that she was not only a survivor, she was a victor, a protector, and a woman whose life could no longer be dictated by fear, power, or anyone else's ambition. The hospital room was quiet now, calm, almost serene. Emily's heart, once weighed with fear, now felt light, steady, unbreakable. Her empire, her daughter, her life, all were safe. She whispered softly to herself, almost as a vow, almost as a declaration. "This is mine, and I will choose what happens next." Emily smiles, holding Arya close as she realizes the future is hers to define, and no one can take it away.